Hello, students. This is Instructor B, and today we're going to go over the spinal cord, and hopefully by the end of this, you should be able to understand the path of motor and sensory neurons as they exit and enter the spinal cord. So what we can see in front of us is a cross-section of the spinal cord, which I'm circling in pink. You can see there are two different colors we've got here, and they are appropriately named. So in the white region, we're going to have the white matter. And in this gray butterfly looking region, we're going to have the gray matter. Now the difference in the white matter versus the gray matter would be that the white matter has axons that are myelinated or surrounded in that fat layer. So if you were to think about cutting through steak or some piece of meat, all of that really fatty region is a little more bright white. And in the gray section, we're going to have more of the cell bodies or the somas of the neurons, as well as more unmyelinated neurons, which will leave it with a slightly different color. Now, before we really start labeling a whole bunch of, the sections of the gray matter, let's go ahead and just get oriented as we always should in anatomy. So I'm going to go ahead and point out this little central canal, put a little star on it, and I can actually separate that canal to split between our anterior and our posterior sides. So toward the bottom of the paper, I am going to see my anterior side of the spinal cord. On the other side, or toward the top end of the paper, I'm going to see my posterior side of the spinal cord. Now, anterior and posterior can get a couple different names. Posterior can also be known as the dorsal or the backside, while my anterior can also be known as the ventral or the front or stomach side. Now, these are just going to be important as we kind of switch naming a little bit as we move from inside of the spinal cord to these nerves that you can kind of see leaving or entering the spinal cord. As we look at this gray matter, as I look toward more of this posterior side, I have the posterior horn of the gray matter. The middle, or one more down, is going to be my lateral horn. Now this horn we are going to talk about a little more in the future with our sympathetics and autonomics. So for right now, just note that it's there, but we're not focused on it today. And then at the very bottom of the paper region, or my anterior side, will be my anterior horn of the spinal cord. Now these two horns and all of the spinal cord in general can be split up into two divisions. As we look more toward the anterior side, we are actually going to have more of the motor division, while as I look toward the back or the posterior side, I have more of my sensory division of neurons. Before we really start, tracing and throwing all of these neurons on my drawing, let's just go ahead and label what the heck's coming off of the spinal cord. As I look and I can see at the bottom of the paper this big old branch coming off on the motor side or anterior side, this will be called my ventral root. This is why it's important to know that anterior and ventral are the same, as we can kind of see the naming from anterior be here in the horn and ventral be here in the root. As we continue, we are going to make this conjoined region as these two areas come together. This will be my spinal nerve. And what's coming together to make the spinal nerve? If we look toward the back and we had, posterior and anterior horn, we have a ventral root, and we're also going to have a dorsal root. Now there is this weird swelling bulbous situation inside of that dorsal root This is going to be where a lot of the cell bodies on the dorsal side are going to live. And where we see a lot of cell bodies all together, we call a ganglion. So this will be called my dorsal root ganglion, which you may hear Pascoe or I refer to as the DRG. So as dorsal root and ventral root come together, make that spinal nerve, they are going to split again into my dorsal ramus and ventral ramus. Now, ramus in Latin, sometimes looking up etymology and anatomy is important and helpful, but ramus is going to mean branch. So as we kind of imagine this whole diagram as a tree, we are taking the roots to the trunk, which would be that spinal nerve, into the branches of the tree or the ramus or the rami. Now these different branches are going to innervate different sections. So as we look at the dorsal ramus or more toward the backside, these are going to innervate these true and deep back muscles, like the erector spinae muscles, that are going to contribute to that upright posture. The ventral ramus is going to contribute a lot to more of our limbs and everything that's more on the front side of our body, like innervating your triceps or biceps brachii, etc. So here are all these regions. Let's go ahead and put some neurons in there. I'm going to go ahead and grab a red to start indicating my motor neurons. So motor neurons are going to have cell bodies that live inside of this anterior horn. I'm going to go ahead and draw 2 since I have 2 rami. My first little motor neuron is going to leave from this anterior horn, go out my ventral root, go through that spinal nerve, and then this one is going to go and innervate the triceps. This other motor neuron is going to leave and come out, go through that ventral root, go through that spinal nerve, and then into that dorsal ramus of an intrinsic back muscle that would be same spinal level as with the triceps would be. Now, as we look and start putting in the sensory nerves, their cell bodies don't live in the posterior horn. They live in the ganglion. So I'm going to go ahead and draw those cell bodies inside of my dorsal root ganglion. Here's one cell body. Here's another cell body. Now these are carrying information back to the brain, unlike the motor division where they are telling our body to fire or to move, right? The sensory innervation is going to be that sensation of touch, of proprioception, letting you know where you're at in space. So these cell bodies are going to be carrying information back to the brain. So here's the ends of their axons, and then here their dendrites are going to be within the tissue. So maybe inside of the skin or something of the back, or in this other neuron's case, they're going to go ahead and carry information back to the brain, but maybe they are feeling the skin on top of the triceps. This spinal nerve right here could also maybe be referred to then as the mixed spinal nerve, as it's kind of the cross between the motor and sensory divisions. So overall, this is the pathway of sensory, or, as it's maybe also known, the afferent neurons. This afferent stands for ascending. That's just a helpful mnemonic. While the motor are going to be your efferent neurons, or ones that are exiting the brain. Now, there are some times where we don't really want to involve our brain in the mix. We touch a hot stove and need to move our hand right away, or someone takes one of those awful tools and hits your patellar tendon. These neurons are going to live right between the two. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a cell body near the ends of that sensory nerve, and I'm going to go ahead and draw their axon to then connect and talk to one of the motor nerves. This little interneuron can bypass the system of feeling something dangerous and bypassing the system to tell our muscle to move, to get away from that stimulus, to extend the leg, etc., so that our body remains more intact and safe, and kind of cutting out the middleman of having the brain involved. You can process that the stove was really hot in just a second, but we need to avoid tissue damage. So these interneurons will be a lot of these reflexes that you'll test in physical therapy. Hopefully, all of this was really helpful, and I hope you have a wonderful day.